My humble pranams at the lotus feet of our dear beloved Bhagwan Baba. Sai Ram, dear brothers and sisters. What a joy to be here. Thank you. I am humbled and overjoyed by the invitation. When Sister Sri Devi asked me to speak, I asked her for a topic, and she rather fittingly said, Divine Mother. In Swami's Navaratri discourse on September 27th, 1992, he said, the first 3 days of the 9 days are dedicated to the worship of Durga. The next 3 days to the worship of Lakshmi. And the final 3 days to the worship of Saraswati. To secure the grace of the Lord, one has to have purity of heart, word, and deed, represented by Lakshmi, Saraswati, and Durga, Tripura Sundari. This quote made me reflect on the Tripura Sundaris in my life. So I wanted to share what I learned from 3 different divine mothers. After I was born, I remained nameless for a while. So now, if any of you are Harry Potter fans, you're probably reminded of the one who shall not be named. I'm hoping that wasn't why I was nameless. My parents were waiting to take me to Puttaparthi to ask Swami to name me, which was very customary back then. And my mother sat in line with me, and my grandmother was there, and her really good friend Neelama, who was very close to Swami. And my mom said that Neelama would talk to Swami like she's his friend and he's her friend. So when Swami came up to them, my mother asked Swami to name me. And Swami very sweetly asked her, what did I name your other daughter? And my mother said, Premamala. So then he said, okay, she will be Shivamala. So most names, and you've probably heard many names that Swami has given children, the meaning is relatively obvious. You rather quickly understand what the name stands for. In this case, people weren't exactly sure. Shivamala literally means the garland around Shiva's neck, which is a snake. So they weren't entirely sure what to do, but they were very grateful. But Neelama couldn't contain her curiosity. So the next time she had a chance to speak to Swami, she said, what is this name? What do you mean by Shivamala? And Swami said, not what any of us expected. He said, Shiva stands for auspicious, and Mala stands for modernity. So auspicious in a modern world. So both of us, Premamala and Shivamala, beautiful but long names. Long for a parent to call, especially when your child is being naughty. So it was very convenient for them to come up with a nickname. So for my sister Premamala, it was Prem. It's so easy, Prem or Prema. So my son calls her Prema Auntie. A lot of people call her Prem. And it's so fitting. She has always been such a loving person. She goes out of her way to help everybody, people that she barely knows. That's who Prema is. She literally embodies that name. For me, they took the first syllables of the 2 words, she and ma, and instead of making it Shima, they said Sima. And I didn't question either. Well, I was really young, so I just accepted both names. So all my official documents were Shivamala, and people that knew me at home always called me Sima. And when I was we moved quite a bit from my life. And when I was about 9 or 10, we moved to Delhi. And that was when I was actually properly learning Hindi for the first time in a way that was actually cogent, where I could understand things in regular life and be able to connect it to my classes. And that's when I realized the meaning of Sima in Hindi means a limit. It's a border. Not a very inspiring meaning. That's what I thought when I heard it. And the only reason I even went to find out is because, in the South, Seema is not a particularly common name. In the North, you actually start to meet people that are called Seema. So it prompted me to go find out what it meant. So then I went and spoke to my mother and I said, so where did Seema come from? What does Shivamala stand for? So then she explained to me what Swami said. And then I was really miffed. I was like, wait, Swami gave me an amazing name. He set the bar so high for the kind of life that he would aspire that I would live up to, which is auspicious in a modern world. And you gave me Seema? And not only was it not inspiring, I felt it was not like, unlike my sister's name, I didn't think it fit me because every bone in my body wants to push the limits on everything. That was just the natural person I was. And when it came to food, French fries and steamed broccoli, that's how I struck a balance, was to go between the two extremes. Extreme asceticism, deep extreme indulgence. And I was really, while I was annoyed, many, many, many moons later, I realized if I have to even begin to understand or fathom what auspicious means, and auspicious in a modern world means, I couldn't possibly ping pong between two extremes. I had to control every urge, which means I had to put a limit. I had to put a limit on every thought, on every word, on every desire. I realized I had to be Seema in order for me to ever aspire to be Shivamala. And that's when I realized what Swami has said in so many discourses. Adehi Mata, the mother who gave us our bodies, is our first divine mother. My mother was my Durga. She was primarily protecting me from my own self. My own urges to push the limit or to do something that wouldn't let me be the best person I can be is exactly what she was protecting me from. So every time I failed to control something, I'm reminded of the wisdom of my mother in naming me Seema. Now, I'm very grateful that all my life I have known and felt the love of a divine mother side. And for that, I have to thank my paternal grandparents. Now, I didn't meet my grandfather because he passed away a year before I was born, but my grandmother truly embodied devotion. So her whole life that I've known her, the vast part of the morning was spent chanting, I can't tell you how many things. From when she would start, she would chant all different Vedas and stotrams. She fasted on every Amavasya and Purnima. And every chance she got, she went to Puttaparthi. And when she wasn't at Puttaparthi, she was in high demand. Every child and every grandchild wanted her to come. Because when she came over and stayed with us, she would tell us stories of Krishna and Rama and Ramayana and Mahabharata and Chinnakatha and Sai. And, my sister and I would fight for who she should look at when she would tell these stories. So she was kind of like in a tennis match. In order to make us both happy, she would keep looking at both of us while she was the most amazing storyteller. And for her 60th birthday, we all gathered in Puttaparthi. And as her luck would have it, Swami called and asked her to come up to go to an interview. So we all gathered in the veranda. I was very young. But I still remember very vividly certain pieces. We all gathered in the veranda, and then Swami invited all of us in. He asked all of her children how they were. He asked her how she was doing. And he materialized a silver Lakshmi for her and gave her a sari, gave us all Padanamaskars. And I reached out to my cousin, who was much older and remembers more from that. And she said that Swami explained to my grandmother the significance of reaching 60. And that means renouncing the material world. And she certainly seemed to do that because she spent the vast majority of her life singing the glory of the God's name. And her great grandchildren very fondly called her JJ Ava because she sang JJ all the time. And for me, she was my Lakshmi because she gave me the greatest wealth of all. She gave me the knowledge of our Divine Mother Sai. Growing up, my father's job took us to many different places before we settled in Delhi for a few years for what was actually probably the most formative years of my childhood, middle school, and a significant part of high school. And Delhi was at that point the furthest we had ever lived from Puttaparthi. And ironically, it was the closest we were to Swami. Delhi had the most amazingly vibrant Sai culture, so many different centers, and we lived walking distance from who would be our Balvikas SSA teacher, and my sister and I had the privilege and the good fortune of being students of the national coordinator back then, who was Mrs. Nimi Cover. And Nimi Auntie, when we met her, was like nobody we had ever met. She had the widest lens on the world. She had lived in different countries. She had done so many different things. She was just a force to be reckoned with. And she brought a very different perspective to the way she ran her SSE classes. She brought a very modern and non judgmental approach to the way she taught about religion and spirituality. And she told us all the stories and experiences with Swami. And in her first interview with Swami, she said to Swami, Swami, I want children. And Swami said, don't worry, I'll send you lots of children. He sent us. And we were her first batch. And she's always had the most emotional bond with her first batch of children. And her house was our second home. We went there so many times in a week. We'd go for, of course, for Bhavikas. We'd go back for bhajan learning. We'd go for service projects. But then we'd have to be there for Nagar Sankirtan because are you going to tell Nimi Auntie that you didn't wake up in time? Not me. And then when she had bhajans, we would be back there. There was Ladies' Day bhajans. I mean, her home, we practically lived in her home. And she was so close to Swami. She would go for every occasion to Puttaparthi. Shivratri, for Dashera, obviously for birthday. She'd go in the summer for his discourses, and she'd come back and tell us all these stories. We couldn't wait for her to come back. And she was an absolutely phenomenal storyteller. And I still remember that one time she came back, and I think this was when Sai Kulwant Hall wasn't fully built. And they were all waiting in line when it poured. It's like as if the heavens opened and rain just poured on everyone. And she said, not a single person got up to leave because everyone wanted to wait and see Swami. And when Swami came out, the rain had stopped, but there was just a light drizzle. And she said, when Swami walked out, there were raindrops on his hair that shined like diamonds. I wasn't even there. I can't tell you how many times I've gone back to that image of Swami walking down with raindrops on his hair that shined like diamonds. And, when there is a teacher-student relationship, there is always a difference in status, simply because one knows so much more than the other. So we are taught to put our teachers on a pedestal. Not Nimi Auntie. Nimi Auntie said, she's our mother. She told our mothers, when they are with me, they are my children. Don't correct them. Don't reprimand them. They are mine. She taught us to love her like a mother. And to me, she was my Saraswati. She taught me, she taught my sister, everything. She taught us so much about religion, about the Gita, she had people that came and taught us how to do yoga. She was an amazing. She gave us all of the knowledge that we've carried every minute after. And Swami has said that the Divine Mother Sai is like 1,000 suns. Nimi Auntie felt like a sun all to herself. She was just phenomenal. So after I had the good fortune of having these 3 divine mothers in my life, to fill my life with Sai, what happens? I go to boarding school and then go to college and then get a job, and I find myself in a life that has no sight other than my morning prayers. And whatever city I was in, I was always a part of a center. So whatever were the weekly activities and whatever were my morning prayers, that was it. Pretty much everything else in my life actually had very little resemblance to the life that I grew up leading. And I met my husband, Jeff, who Swami very intentionally picked out for me. That's a separate story, by the way. And he grew up with no organized religion. He doesn't follow. He's always been a very independent-minded person in the way he's lived life. But he was my link to everything American. He taught me to understand and appreciate and truly respect American beliefs, culture, rules, rituals, family bonds, and of course, popular culture. So very early on in the early 90s, he said, there's a movie I want you to watch. And it was called Defending Your Life. Have any of you seen Defending Your Life? It was a movie, it was launched in the early 90s. It was written by Albert Brooks, who was also the lead character, along with Meryl Streep, who was the other lead character along with him. So when the movie opens, we meet Daniel Miller, who is an advertising executive. And it's his birthday. He's finishing celebrating his birthday with his office colleagues. And he goes to pick up for himself a birthday present, which was a brand new BMW convertible, which the dealer handed him and said, it comes with a CD player. Remember those? When we had cars with CD players? And he said, as a present, here are a couple CDs for you to listen to. And so he's listening to a CD, loving his life because it's his birthday and it's a great gift, when he makes a sharp left turn, which causes the CD sitting in the passenger seat to fall down. And he can't wait, right? He's compelled to pick them up. So he bends down to pick them up. And at that point, you see that he's going to run straight into a bus. In the next scene, we see him in a nondescript place. He's on a tram, kind of a little out of sorts, with a lot of much older people. And what we realize very quickly is he's in this middle world that is called Judgment City. And he goes in with everyone else, check into a hotel, and he's told that everything is free. He gets one thing to wear, which is a white toga. That's all he wears all the time. All the food is apparently amazingly delicious and no calories count. So for me, it would be French fries all the way through. And then we start to realize what the point of it is, which is that every person that is there in Judgment City gets to face a judge. They get their own lawyer, is also a prosecutor, and scenes from their life are reviewed in order to determine whether they are evolved enough to go to the next iteration of life, or have they not evolved enough and have to go back to Earth. And we start to see that his first day in court, this is not going to be a swimmingly easy trial for him. And he's always reminded it's not a trial, but he feels like he's on trial. And you get a sense that it's not very clear. People aren't sure whether he's evolved enough to proceed or he has to go back to Earth. And after one of his days in court, he meets Julia, who's Meryl Streep. And Julia and he are pretty much the youngest people in Judgment City. So they become friends and they hang out. And he goes in the tram to drop her off at her hotel when he realizes, oh my gosh, her hotel's a 5-star resort. His, in comparison, is Motel 6. So he's starting to get a feeling that there's something different about the life she's led. And then we find out that she has had a child, she's adopted a child, and she is definitely way more evolved and is moving in the right direction. Whereas when all the debates and all of the questions come up in court, we realize that people aren't sure that he's gotten over the one important determining factor. Did he overcome fear? And his lawyer says, fear is like a giant fog. It sits on your brain and blocks everything: real feelings, true happiness, real joy. Fear makes people lie, be selfish, lack compassion, end up lonely, and lack of love. And that's when it hit me. Oh my gosh, this may be a Hollywood movie, but this is Swami's message. Swami's message about overcoming fear. And I went to look for different examples of it because, we've heard it all our life. And in Sathya Sai Speaks, volume 29, he has a Chinnodaram. I love his Chinnodaram. When a small sparrow perches on a tender branch of a tree, it is not afraid by the swaying of the branch, because it depends on the strength of its wings, not on the branch. A sparrow has confidence in the strength of its wings, but people lack faith in self. So even when the slightest difficulty causes fear, it makes them unsteady. Our faith in God is our pair of wings, but we don't have enough trust in it in order to fly, in order for us to overcome fear, in order for us to do the courageous acts that actually say that we have evolved and are ready for the next iteration of life. And this is just one example where I started to realize that any narrative, any story that had any meaning, I could connect back to Swami's message. And I, like Daniel Miller, I'm an advertising executive, and we communicate through stories. In everything, we tell stories about the products to consumers. We tell stories about consumers to our clients. We tell stories about our clients to other clients. So we learn how to write a story. And we're taught that the most important aspect of a story is conflict. Yes, conflict, the one thing that we all avoid at all cost. Because if there's no conflict, there's no story. There's nothing interesting to follow. So when we're taught that, typically stories have three different kinds of conflict. One is man versus his environment. So these are your classic action movies. So whether it's an alien or it is an earthquake, man is in struggle with something in his environment that he has to overcome. The second kind of conflict is really, really common. It's man versus man. And that's the crux of pretty much every narrative we see, whether it's a drama or a comedy or a thriller or an action. But it's the third kind of conflict that is the most interesting. And that is man versus himself. And every time we see a really good story, it is always about an inner conflict. And that again reminds me of Swami's message of life is but a reflection, reaction, resound. So if we find a flaw outside, the only way for us to fix it is to look within. I've heard Swami's message about omnipresence and non-dualism. And in Sathya Sai Speaks, volume 22, he explained the principles of Bhava Advaita, attitude of oneness, Kriya Advaita, the unitary attitude of work, and Padartha Advaita, the non-dualism as it relates to objects. And over the course of all these years, I finally started to see that the world that I thought was non-Sai is Sai, because there is no such thing as a non-Sai world. There's no person that is a non-Sai person. And if I have to judge my own life, I imagine I'm kind of right there with Daniel Miller. I'm not entirely sure how evolved I am. And I have a feeling I've been on this course on Earth several times. But if that meant experiencing the divine love of our Mother Sai, I would do it many times over again. Sairam.